Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to talk about practice gaps. This is hot on the heels of a publication that recently came out in the Global Spine Journal. And the publication summarizes what we've learned recently about gaps in what we know and practice in general in spinal oncology. This was a survey that was administered to AO Spine members throughout the world. And we've had some very interesting results that will certainly guide our future research and the work that the AO Spine Knowledge Forum Tumor is going to be doing. But I also think it could be of interest to people who are conducting research outside of Knowledge Forum and perhaps give some ideas for what types of questions to ask and then the research. So this was a survey that was administered to the entire membership. We received 381 responses. This is from 82 countries. And so this actually does represent a pretty broad international surgeon population. And the objectives were to define the current practice patterns in spinal oncology in terms of what instruments are being used in decision support and patient evaluation, assess how comfortable the surgeons are with making decisions in primary metastatic and intradural tumors, and identify unmet knowledge needs, as I previously mentioned. Just based on the AO representation, we had more orthopedic spine surgeons respond than neurosurgeons, which I think is representative of just the AO membership in general. 75% of the respondents said they had tumor-focused practices, but these were mixed practices because similar proportions said that they also do degenerative and deformity type of operations as well. And reasonably busy surgeons. Almost half are 100 to 200 cases a year, and many do quite a bit more than that. So, just a couple of bullet points about the tumors in general. Primary tumors, as you would expect, low volume globally. Majority of the surgeons who responded said they operate on less than 5 per year. These tend, and larger volume ones, of course, tend to be focused in specialized centers. Metastatic tumors are much more common. These are widely treated. Majority of the respondents said they're treated at least 20 to 40 per year, and many treat quite a few more than that. Intradural is very variable and focused on neurosurgeons, of course. So perhaps the insight here is that primary disease is centralized, metastatic is very common, mainstream, and even this information can remind us of what types of research and educational activities we can be conducting for primary metastatic tumors. For primary tumors, most of the surgeons said they're comfortable deciding what's a true emergency. Whether to take the patient for some type of surgery. Perhaps a little surprisingly, majority of the respondents said that they're comfortable doing en-bloc resections. Perhaps that's a testament to the strength of education that's been conducted, but also I think the confidence of the group. Not too many people have usable frailty or survival tools that they're able to use in order to decide, make some decisions for these patients. So that is one of the areas for development in the future, of course. The things that the surgeons highlighted, and these are multiple people who had similar challenges, are in coordinating surgery with systemic therapy, whether it's before or after the surgery. And the idea that many people perhaps understand that big surgery has been shown to be potentially beneficial, so that seems to be the go-to for many people. But when they see a real patient in front of them, sometimes it's an older patient, sometimes it's a more frail patient, sometimes it's a patient they're not quite sure whether this is a big tumor and whether surgery is really going to be meaningful. So even though a lot of the textbook may say, well, en-bloc resection is the surgical answer, a lot of people hesitate applying that to a real patient with the idea that there's a significant recovery that has to go into it, and perhaps some penalty in terms of neurologic and functional deficits that may result from aggressive resection. And so whether it's still worth it in the real world. So those questions did come up, and we think one of the gaps is structure and integration of prognosis into the operative planning. For metastatic tumors, we asked about framework adoption. 80% of the respondents used decision frameworks. NOMS is by far the most commonly used. testament to its wide applicability and just utility. The Bielski SEC score is very widely used, one of the most common by far. So that and SINS, almost universal in how people assess patients with metastatic tumors, which is great to know. I mean, both I think, all think are very valuable and useful instruments, and fairly well validated and integrated. Again, survival and frailty are not very well integrated, although there are some instruments out there, and there's just a smattering of people using one over another. We haven't really given very good guidance in terms of which ones are potentially beneficial. So people are comfortable with deciding who needs to be decompressed and who's really unstable. Again, testament, I think, to SINS, the instability category being pretty clear cut in most situations. But again, tailoring these indications to the patient and understanding what the prognosis is one of the challenges for metastatic patients as well. Back to the decompression part. So people are comfortable with knowing emergency decompressions. Somebody who's in the process of being paralyzed from metastatic epidural spinal cord compression, people know to decompress. People reported they're fairly comfortable instrumenting the metastatic spine, and the technical component of it. But some of the big challenges that were once again pointed out by a fairly high proportion of surgeons is about timing. And timing in reference to systemic therapy, the neurologic cases, when exactly to take the patient to surgery. Well, if it's not an absolute emergency, the patient being paralyzed in front of the eyes, there is a lot of variability in how people assess and think about it. And we think that's an important gap to fill. People know about the utility of steroids and neuroprotection, but unclear about duration and dosing. And then high comorbidity patients are also challenging in terms of deciding whether to actually take them to surgery or not. So people would love some clear guidelines when it comes to these things, and that's another gap that we hope to fill over the next couple of years, although we know the guidelines are quite labor intensive. For intradural tumors, one of the main questions that came up where we can provide some clarity is timing. So Anu just gave a great talk about the surgery and some of the ways decisions are made, and I thought it was terrific. But based on the response of people, people know that if there's a tumor, they should be either monitoring or thinking about it. If it's a clearly symptomatic tumor, there's probably indication for resection. But again, so much gray area in terms of when to take somebody who is mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic, whether they should be taking them to surgery and so on. So the indication threshold is one of the big questions from the community. Looking at what worked, SINS and ESCC score clear leaders of the pack here, over 90% awareness and use. And perhaps why they're being used so much is because both when SINS was being developed by the SOSG group and the ESCC was being developed by Mark Bielski, there was a clear clinical problem and a real need to try to address it. So that was the first step. Of course, the result was a simple and actionable structure that you can use at point of care when you're looking at a patient. So it's easy to use, and then there was a pretty strong dissemination push, especially for SINS. There was this cycle of putting it in all the publications and then including in all the talks and making sure that people are really aware of it. So for AO spine, SINS is probably the paragon of effective knowledge translation. Things that haven't well penetrated into utilization and what people know, survival prediction instruments and frailty metrics, SOSGOQ, which was an instrument that was developed for quality of life assessment in the oncologic population. There was a fairly low awareness, it turns out, of this instrument. And then the AO surgery reference tumor modules. I don't know if people are familiar with AO surgery reference, but it's a free online reference source for surgical technique and indications, and it provides pretty good guidance about the indications on how to do the surgeries, but a lot of people are unaware. So just because we have it, clearly it's not necessarily being used, which is a bit of a shame. and we have some work to do in fixing that. So, this is a screenshot of the Spine Oncology, I suppose, GOQ questionnaire. Just for those who don't know, who are listening, this was a quality of life instrument that was developed specifically for the spinal oncology population, validated and being very widely used in many publications, but it's not fully utilized in clinical care much, and not everybody's using it for their publications as well. So perhaps there's some room to grow here. But this was the cycle. It was developed. It was validated, and is being used. Another thing that's out there already, and we should certainly be working to improve people's familiarity with it. This was really NAS initiative led by Dan Schuba, is the framework for decisions for intramedullary spinal cord tumors. And this was a Delphi panel that assembled to facilitate decisions. And there is pretty good guidance here, I think, in terms of how to decide who to take to the operating room and intraoperative decisions as well. And then finally, just a plug for PEPSO. This was a new instrument that was developed in collaboration with Knowledge Farm Tumor, and this is something looking at patient expectations. And Versteeg led this effort. She identified another gap, which was we're not doing a great job, as it turns out. I don't know if it's surprising to people, trying to understand what the patients expect from the surgeries that we're offering them. Some patients go into metastatic tumor surgery thinking we're curing them of cancer and so on. So she did the work to demonstrate that there's a lot of room to improve the patient understanding, and this is a type of instrument that was developed for it and is in the process of being validated. And so, having realized some of the shortcomings in terms of knowledge translation, the Global Spine Journal now has a monthly article that is intended to highlight some of the recent or just important clinical topics and how to integrate them into practice. And this is not confined to spinal oncology. There's a rotation in spinal oncology, deformity, spinal cord injury, trauma, and so on. So there are multiple topics. So keep an eye out for those. But having said that, we wanted to make sure that PEPSO is something that people are noticing. So this was an article highlighting that and recommending its inclusion into practice. So in summary, what the community wants, they really would like some surgical timing guidelines, stabilization guidance in terms of the gray areas and sins. As we know, a very significant proportion of patients are in that gray area of indeterminate stability. And then tumor-related pain treatment guidelines and protocols for steroid administration. What we found is that the global spine community is technically confident in terms of instrumentation, decompression, ways to take out tumors. They're fairly comfortable with instability and spinal cord compression assessment, but we don't have structured guidance for survival, frailty, and timing, and people on guidelines. So for AO Spine and Knowledge Farm Tumor, this is exactly what we're working on now: develop prognosis, integrated timing, and stabilization frameworks, practical steroid and pain management assessment and guidance, and work on better implementation. And I think just one last point, I think, that I said in the beginning, and I think it's quite interesting, we forget, we try to generally give equal representation to primary tumors and metastatic tumors, and, the surgery of it, the indications and so on. But the reality is when people are in practice, perhaps, when it comes to metastatic tumors, indications, treatment, how to take the patient to surgery is important for majority of people to know. But, when it comes to primary tumors, education about those types of things is still important. But, I think focusing in terms of identifying, making sure that, the diagnostic workup is appropriate and, consideration for referral to specialized centers. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilya. These are all these questions are such important questions. We are even us as experienced surgeons sometimes deal with these exact same questions. For me, a lot of those intradural tumors, where you see somebody who has no symptoms, but it's pretty sizable schwannoma or a meningioma, You don't really know how long it's been there, but there's pretty significant compression on the cord or on the conus. And it's like, do you operate based on the films that look pretty bad, or you operate based on the patient's symptoms? And there's no clear indications of when to do it, when there is no, it's always easy when there's neurological issues. When there is no neurological issues, but the MRI looks pretty scary. And it's like, how is this patient have no symptoms? And it's almost harder not to do something than it is to just sit tight and not do anything.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that. And as you were talking, I was just thinking through last, few weeks of patients, and I have some patients with a very large. I saw a woman with a large cervical trauma. I saw her 6 months ago. She was incredibly active and completely asymptomatic, and she had no interest in surgery. And I saw her 6 months later, and she remains asymptomatic, and this
Yeah,
frenoma is stable.
yeah,
And we're pretty comfortable watching her. I think what type of triggers would push me in one direction or another. T2 hyperintensity in spinal cord, even if the patient is asymptomatic, perhaps. For lower down, I agree. I think we monitor some of the large lumbar schwannomas, but some patients prefer to have them taken out, especially if it's a young patient with a large, nerve sheath tumor that's occupying the majority of the cross section of the canal.
yeah.
Some say, let's get it done now. And, I think that's okay too. I mean, we talk about the risks. We talk about the fact that, you can probably follow it for a while as well without it becoming symptomatic. So, I think we try to work with the patient to make the right decision in a personalized way.
Any other question from the audience? We don't hear you. I mean,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And Dr. Laufer, I just wanted to commend you on the AO Spine Tumor Forum. And I wanted to ask you specifically about, you kind of highlighted how the SINS has been somewhat universally accepted and really transmitted through the AO group. Can you describe sort of, the implementation science of that, of how do you use what you learned from there for future things? How do you guys prioritize what is like the best thing to sort of implement globally?
Yeah, a great question. And it's actually a very big part of the work that is being done right now. There's now a whole group for knowledge translation. And it turns out that, we have a lot to learn. So those are really good examples. And why were they good examples? Because there was a very clear, like I said, problem that we just were having trouble agreeing on, what do we do? And so then, that was developed in order to address that. A lot of the research that we do doesn't actually start there, right? We're like, oh, well, it'd be cool to find this out. And then, we have a certain, number or an N and, a p-value, and we're happy with it. And we don't do much else with it because now it's published and, we think that people should know what we're trying to do. So, really, as we're designing our research, starting with, what problem we're trying to solve really, and then also having a plan of, even before you start the research, about how you think it should look, whichever way you find the answer, positive, negative, and so on. Having that plan for knowledge dissemination and translation is really, really important, because you want it to be applicable, but it's not going to be particularly applicable if all it is a printout of a PDF. And so you're absolutely right. So, whether you want it to be decision framework, whether you want it to lead to some sort of guideline development, having those types of questions and thinking about them ahead of time is really, really important.
Any other questions? All right, great, guys. Thank you very much, Ilya. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we have